Well, I think like any other little girl in Canada, everybody skates and skates and skates, and of course I did and loved it, and ended up at what was the club in Toronto at the time when I was growing up, the Toronto Skating Club, and many, many champions in the early days came from there. And I just evolved into an ice dancer along the way, but did single skating for a little while, but that wasn't my bag. I hated figures. You did them at 6 o'clock in the morning in a dead cold silent rink, which was awful. And I have to say, in the last 20 years, they finally, I might have done them now, because now they, when figures were sort of phasing out, they were doing it to music, which I think I might have been able to handle. But anyway, I got very interested in shows as well, which again was related to music and so on and so forth. But from the ice dancing, I went on to compete 1 year and then got married. But we all grew up together, and when judging came along, it was sort of, you reached the age of 16 and they'd hand you a clipboard and say, okay, judge. And so that's how we all started. And I have a number of children, and I just didn't have a lot of time to cover all of the disciplines. It's really time consuming to stay on top of everything. So as my judging days continued, I just took my time for ice dancing and followed it all the way through the test system, to become a referee, to do competitions and then championships and so on. So that's really my involvement in skating. Kept it up for quite a number of years as an old morning glory for exercise and whatnot. But, having done it all, a lot of the judges today haven't been through the competitive system themselves. I think that gave us all a little bit more insight into what a competitor needs, what a championship is, what a competition is. And when I finally went on to the international scene as a judge, then I did a lot of team leading with the skaters, and having been a competitor again, could anticipate their needs as much as anybody else could. And so that has always been my I suppose my interest, working with the skaters, knowing the sport, and trying to make it better for everybody. So that's it. Just because of my involvement in judging, I just continued on, judged to the highest level here in Canada, and then I was asked to chair the Judges Committee for Central Ontario, which is this part of Ontario. And from there, I went on to the board of what was then Canadian Figure Skating Association, and served as the National Judges Chairman for a number of years. But during all this time, I was, furthering my judging and writing exams and doing all that kind of thing. And so it just kind of grew like Topsy. I really didn't go into it ever thinking I would be, on the council of the ISU, nor did I ever think I would be that involved on the international scene at all. But I was always interested in championships, and my latter days with even the ISU and Skate Canada, and I guess both Olympics, was the organization of the sport and the events that became, when you get onto the skating, the ISU technical committees, you were allowed to referee, and that we did. But when you're on the council, you no longer do that. You're really, the governing body, and you remain pretty much out of that scene. But however, the technical running of events and so on, that was really the part that I zeroed in on in my last, say, 8 or 9 years on the council. Well, finances are not really my expertise. Um, I'd have to think about that. The division, of course, there are fewer of the events for speed skating. And I don't believe in my memory of the running of their events that they're as costly, nor are there as many competitors, and their venues have nearly the requirements that we need for a championship. And so the balance between what is required for running a speed skating event obviously is less than what's required for running a figure skating championship. I would think basically from the television contracts which they have had. And they've had some very, very expert advice over the years in their financial arrangements. And I think they've worked very hard to build up their financial position that they can maintain the programs that they've established. Those contracts are rather long. They depend, sometimes they're 5 years or 7 years or whatever the choice is, and they run, and they were very lucrative for many years, and they invested money and did it wisely, and started many new programs. I have to say, development programs around the world, and that came along when I was on the council, and certainly the world of videos and training programs, they were not a part of it in the early days, but as we had more financial backing and funds, we were able to initiate some of these programs. I honestly don't have any, I don't really remember the figures of the early days to any large extent. I do know the contracts are less now than they were, and I think the end of Salt Lake, and I'm not sure when the last contracts, CTV, ABC, and TBS were the main, and of course the one, and EBU in Europe. I'm not sure when their old contracts ended and when they began, but the money is not nearly as much as it has been in the past, and I think that's because the popularity of figure skating maybe has diminished slightly in the last 4 or 5 years, and also the costs are tremendous for those people to come and work an event. Maybe overexposure, and a little bit, and I think that there was a little disillusionment in what went on at Salt Lake City. Nothing was ever really, I mean, it was proven, there was a hearing and so on, and it rather tainted the sport that someone in such a high capacity with a federation within the ISU and a judge would, get into a situation where there was some background, problems in the judging, and I think that maybe that disillusioned a lot of people. But I think overexposure was part of it. And also, as maybe seeing the same people over and over again. I granted they changed their programs, but it's fun to see the new young spark on the scene, and then to see them maybe a year or two. But we've watched a lot of people for many years, and so there's two sides to every coin. Not as a Canadian. I was what they call the technical delegate of that event, of that championship, along with a chap from Japan, and I was waiting to get the skaters eventually to the kiss and cry, or at least to the medal ceremony, and of course they skated, and then they waited for the marks, and then it was just so quiet in the arena. But my job was really to keep the program on stream and to allow the skaters who were, I'd have to say, what should I say, stunned perhaps, but equally I think the Russians were as well. I think they were in the background, and I could only allow them so much time. So I was there in an official capacity, not as a Canadian. It's hard to explain that, but I had to get them on to the next part of the event. And if I could tell you anything, I've done a lot of medal ceremonies in my day, and the faces of those 3 couples on that podium, I will never ever forget. The Chinese couple did not have a good skate, so they were disappointed in their own personal performance. I think the Russians were partly astonished that it had ended up the way it did. Perhaps they had a good skate too, of course, but it was it was so Canadian an audience that night that when they did come out, they did clap for them. We're not that rude or impolite. And the Canadians were wonderful. They were, in a terrible, terrible position. The disappointment must have been just, amazing for them. But their behavior on the podium and through the medal ceremonies and off, I could only congratulate the three couples. But I will never forget it. It was just such an emotional downtime for everybody. But anyway, as I say, I couldn't get into it as a Canadian. I was there as an ISU official, and I had my job, and that's what I was trying to do. The technical delegate actually runs the event in every phase that touches the sport. The competitors, the coaches, the parents, the volunteers, everything. That's a normal, and the federation. With the Olympics, things like transportation, housing, that kind of thing, that's not under our jurisdiction. Of course, that becomes an Olympic job to be housed in the village or whatever. On a normal championship, a technical delegate would look after where the hotel is, what the transportation needs are, how many buses do they run, what the meal hours are like. But you essentially touch every part that goes into making of a championship. I would think so. There are cameras in the back where the skaters' entrance, and in Salt Lake City, the entrance and the exit were side by side, and it was a very, very small area. And the sort of like the where the skaters waited to go on were the places they sat when they were finished their skating, especially the last two or three where who are going to be in the medals. We just asked them to remain there so we can get a handle on them and get them quickly to the medal ceremony. And so my guess is that whether the Canadians watched the Russians, I really don't know. I was not in the back with them, and I was up in the front, and I can't tell you that. But certainly the Russians watched the Canadians, and that's why I say I think there was a measure of disappointment with them too. I think they were as surprised or I won't say shocked. That's too strong a word. I think they were. I think they didn't expect perhaps that outcome. I don't know. I certainly think they did. They skated a lovely program that night. There was no, and remember that again, going back to myself personally, when I'm doing that job, I watch everything, but I don't judge. I don't look at the program. I don't look at the content necessarily. I mean, how many axles, how many this, did they rotate? I don't look at that kind of thing. I'm looking to make sure that the ice is right, that the lights are right, that the rink boards are okay, that there's that was what I was doing, and I watch the skaters, but I don't watch them as to the details of their performance. But certainly the overall from where I was standing, and I'd been there, I'd watched the Russians as well and the Chinese. So we're all up front at when it comes to the end of an event, of course, to watch. So that's what I would be doing. I couldn't zero in and say they did 5 triples or they did, monumental throws or whatever. I couldn't answer that, and that wasn't my job to be there. Um, I guess I have to say that have over the years, I've tried so hard to be unbiased with everybody that I had to understand what they were going through and to leave them to themselves for a period of time. But then I had to go in and say, I'm sorry, but I must interrupt you and we must go to the next part. And kept it very much on a low key business kind of feeling. And funnily enough, I'll tell you about that couple if it's of any interest. Many years, I took a team to events in Saint-Gervais-Oberstdorf for about 20 years. They were always young. They were always brand new on the skating scene. And I took Jamie Soleil on her very first trip. And David Peltier came with me some years later before he was skating with her, and he came as a single skater. And David was always a maverick from day one. And so when they gave him to me on the team, they said, "Well, Joyce, here's your challenge. You got David Peltier." Well, I said, "You know what? I think maybe you could be the team captain." And he was great. And to this day, he never gave me 1 ounce of trouble, no matter what. And today I could meet him and he's just the same. So I've had Jamie from the first day, and her mother called me and she said, "Now, Joyce, I don't really know you, but she was only 13 or 14 and she was skating with somebody else. And it was just and her partner, I can't think what his name was now. Anyway, she said, I know that he will keep an eye on her," because there were some older kids on the team as well, but and they were with me for 2 weeks. So I sort of stick-handled my way through all of them for these 20 years, but I always enjoyed them. They were great to start with and to start them on their way. But Jamie I've known since her very first trip. I think along the way in the work with that people that the Skate Canada has done with competitors in teaching them or helping them to respond to the press, to speak. In the early days, none of us ever got any of that training at all as to how to answer questions, how to go to a press conference, how to do any of those things. And gradually, as we became more, when I say efficient, maybe more knowledgeable, and to round out the competitor, if you like, to make sure that he can handle things, I think maybe part of that helped them, that they'd had some background in behavior, perhaps, or how to handle various situations. I'm thinking that probably that was a great help to them, and I thought they handled it very well. As I say, anything that happened after that night, again, like their press conferences or any of that, I was not part of anything. I was not part of that at all. I would have to say, and within themselves, I think they'd had enough training that they were, I won't say comfortable, but they had a strength maybe in them that they could handle the situation. And they had, I'm sure team-wise, they had some great support from their team leaders that were there. Gosh, I honestly don't know. Certainly, that night they just skated like they were really together, and you could feel it in the arena. And I never did. I don't know whether I ever watched a program. I don't know whether I ever saw the program on television. To be honest with you, to tell you, I know that when you watch on TV, you lose the speed. You don't feel the audience contact nearly the same, and it just is a different ambience totally when you watch it. Well, I shouldn't say totally, you get a good picture of it, but probably 75% is the same, and the other 25 is what you find in when you're actually in the arena and can feel the electricity and whatever that's going on. But I don't know. They were just really on that night, no doubt about it. Well, they had once there had been evidence of the illegalities that took place in the judging, if you like. Then the president with his legal advisors and general secretary, they met, and I'm sure there was input perhaps from the IOC. I don't know that. I wasn't part of any of that. And then we were called to a council meeting late one evening, several days later. I think I'm not. It certainly wasn't the next day. But I can't remember. I think it was 2 days later, and they and the council had to. I don't know whether it was a question of I think 3 options of how to solve the problem, kind of thing, and I don't remember really what the first 2 were, but the third option was the awarding of the second medal, the second gold medal as an option to the skater. And I mean, to me, there was just no alternative, because if there is any question of illegality, you have to go with the competitor. It wouldn't have mattered where they came from. But if there was any hanky-panky in the judging of any kind, then of course you'd have to go with the second medal. And it wasn't establishing something new and different. There had been other medals, second medals awarded in other events. And I at that time, I don't know whether we were told about those medals, but certainly there was lots of chit-chat that went on, just in general. And so the council voted to have the second medal awarded. Honestly, I can't remember that. I really don't. I had a lot to do with when they, in order for the protocol, like the protocol is is the paper that's written that shows all of the marks of every competitor and every part for every judge. That's what's called a protocol. And when finally the second medals were awarded, it was quite a mathematical exercise to reflect that in the protocol. And I'm not a computer expert at all, but we all worked not I certainly didn't work on the computer part, but it all had to be verified and appear in the protocol as to how this second medal would appear and what the actual protocol would look like to reflect this whole situation. It's quite interesting, actually. I'd have to think back a little bit. I have to say I was so busy doing other things that my days just continued on with all of the other events that we were doing, and this was something that was happening. I think there was certainly pressure for some kind of a decision to be made on site. I'm not sure that Ottavio seemed perhaps hesitant to. He wanted I think, the council to handle the matter internally, I think, initially. That was my feeling. I don't know I mean, that was never said. I'm just sort of had that feeling myself, that he had hoped to deal with it internally, and whether that could possibly be done on site. That's pretty hard to do it at an Olympic Games, and that's as I say, I don't know whether there was pressure from other places. I really don't know. No, I would think that Ottavio was the one who was bearing the brunt of the pressure. It certainly, I don't think, filtered down to everybody. I think we were all aware that, this was going on. But for me personally, I was with, the vice president was the other technical delegate with me, and Claire Ferguson from the States. And I'm not sure that any of us, really were feeling any particular major stress over it. I think that was in the realm of Ottavio and the legal advisors, because they were the people who were going to have to give us the guidance. Well, I think that when Olaf was president, he came through that era where perhaps our financial base wasn't as large as it became when Ottavio became president. And I think that with Ottavio, and we were getting into the modern world, I have to tell you, when Ottavio came, I think that the old council, and I certainly served on that as well, and I can it was a very, I don't want to say, not, how can I put it? They didn't get into the I'll use an example, computers and websites and things like that. They were just coming into the being, if you like. And that wasn't part of the ISU in those days. The ISU was run from a wonderful office with a great staff up in the mountains in Switzerland. And it was pretty low key, actually. Then Ottavio came and kind of opened the doors. We had our first kind of think tank or general session where we threw lots of ideas on the table, and I actually managed to talk them into putting a website together, and we got into the computer world, and I could just see we had to get on to visit the old lady on the council, but I just knew that for my purposes we had to get into the real world, and that pretty much came with Ottavio. But also I think it helped because we had some excellent contracts, and as I say, it gave us funds to use the video techniques, use many of these things that we didn't have before. So well, it was kind of, I as I said, I have a lot of kids. They're and maybe living around them. And one of the boys is a computer guru. And when we had a championship in I don't know whether Edmonton, I think it must have been Edmonton. One of my son's friends came along and said, Mrs. Hisey, do you think there'd be any chance that we could talk the organizing committee into establishing a website? Well, anyway, I didn't know what a website was, and even though Dennis was very involved, I don't even go to the ISU website now because I sort of watch it from other places. But anyway, that didn't pan out because the organizing committee, some telephone company donated it. But anyway, I thought, well, maybe we should have one. So I went back. I said to my son, how much could you set up a website for? Anyway, he gave me a price. I went back to the council. I said, okay, how'd you like to take a stab at a website? And it'll cost you $1,500. And and Dennis designed the logo and so on and so forth. And so he's been doing part of their website ever since, long gone. So I don't know how many years ago that is now, 1994 maybe. So anyway, and the computer world, we had to get into the computer world. They were typing a lot of the stuff very efficiently. The staff was fabulous, really. They got out, I mean, to think of how much material they distributed around the world, 2 girls and a general secretary, was truly amazing. But it got into the business of the sports themselves. Speed skating, short track, and now of course we have synchronized on the loop. They needed help themselves. They were developing too, and the needs of each sport required that we hire more staff, and and that was all part of whatever. Ottavio asked me the first year he became president if I would kind of keep an eye on administration, and we did not have the general secretary then that we have now. I also introduced him along the way to a very fine press officer, Penny Dane, and I had met her when I was doing the same work with another friend in British Championships in Birmingham, and she was the press officer. And I was so impressed with her that when I said, we got to get into the world of handling the press better. And so I flew over one day. Ottavio flew in. We met in London. This girl was based in London, had a lunch, and ended up with Penny becoming the ISU press officer and also being the lady who began ISU World, which is the publication put out by the ISU. So along the way, I've had lots of I've had wonderful experiences with them, taking ideas and running with them, and or finding people that were good for them. And this Penny Dane was outstanding. She worked for several sports, and but she was also the figure skating one in Salt Lake. So had a lot of part of the the press business with all the controversy and whatnot. But great respect for her. So, as I say, I found her at the World Championship in Birmingham. So along the way, I've had I'd say, I don't know whether it's organizational skill or whatever it is, but I just knew that you had to get on with things. And the other thing, I worked a long time with the championships to standardize them, because to run a championship, you're trying to give the best of everything for the skaters, that they could do the best job. And every time we went to another location, it was a different cup of tea. So the last 10 years or so, this friend of mine and myself, and certainly myself the last 4, we tried to make it a level playing field. And they had always had a memorandum for running championships, but I took it along the way, and now everybody sort of works from the Bible, if you like, and in that case, we had wonderful rapport with the television networks. I came through an era where, CBS wouldn't talk to CBC, and the Japanese weren't talking to anybody, and then we took on CTV and ABC and TBS. And I will say that meetings were held, and if ABC couldn't come, they would allow CTV to look after their interests. And that was just amazing, that they never had worked with such so well together. And this didn't seem to matter which event they were at; they were a cohesive unit. So I sort of take that as a lot of work on my part to make it happen. And now we have different networks, so I don't know who's doing everything. CTV is not there, and ESPN, I think, is working for doing the ABC bit. Although they're bringing in the producers, some of the producers that had done the championships. And there's another Japanese network. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience for me. I loved it, and it gave you a handle on everybody. You touched coaches, skaters, as I said, and to make it run efficiently and swiftly and whatever. That was my bag. To be honest with you, I don't think it matters. I think when you achieve the title of president of an association or a union like the ISU, you have to be above the sports, if you know what I mean, and you have to try and balance. It's not. I'm not from speed skating, and I'm going to make sure that the speed skaters are looked after. You can't do that, in my estimation, as a council member, and certainly not as a president. I think that the speed skaters are very good at looking after themselves. I think they really do. I think that you can tell from the various proposals that come up whenever there's when we have our council, when they have the congresses, and all these proposals come to change the rules. If a figure skating championship has been determined, like the year we began the 4 continents, which actually was to balance Europeans, well then right away the speed skaters felt they should do the same thing. So they instigate their own whatevers. But I don't think that I would ever say that either president was just zeroing in on one sport at all. I think Ottavio has spent a lot of time with figure skating because he felt that was where he should be spending his time, and he needed to do it, and something had to be done, and right or wrong, he plowed in, and so. To be very honest with you, when I retired and it started, I retired those papers to a file. And I glance at them, and I enough that I can read, when I'm in the arena. But it's so complex now, and having no need to ever do anything with it, I really don't know the in-depth business about it. The anonymity, I think, could have been handled a different way. An anonymity, because there's been so much pressure over the years. As I say, even in my day, when member countries would say, you know, make deals, or I'll do this for you if you'll do that for that. And I have to say, nobody ever came to me. So maybe they sense something about people that are going to play the straight game, and those who can be talked to, I'm not sure. But in any case, those games were always played, and we always knew that, because sometimes people were called, as they were some many years ago, and people were suspended for life for playing hanky-panky in the judging world. Anyway, I can't tell you about this. I find the knowledge and the responsibility of the technical controller and what have you is tremendous. And I do know some people that just don't want that responsibility at all. If they've been invited and have gone to a seminar, they just say, it's not my bag, you know. And it is a huge responsibility to the technical specialists, and where they come from and how they're chosen. I really have no idea. I can tell you I have enough faith in human nature that I think that the judges will, as they've always tried to do, protect themselves. Nobody wants to be pulled out and be suspended or receive a demotion or do whatever. And I think probably they have found a way in which to make sure that they keep themselves within the parameters that are required. But I can't give you an opinion on it. I would think eventually that will happen. That's what I think. It's another judging system. And I think sometime there will, you know, computers are not always 100% perfect. And every year there seems to be a glitch somewhere or other, and so on and so forth. I suspect it will level out. I think that it probably will. I don't know when, and maybe it won't be in my lifetime, but it's another judging system. And whether the public likes it or not, some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them love that 6.0 and the thrill of seeing it up there. The skaters, they think it's lovely. They can find out what they've done or haven't done. Mistakes are definitely made, and that's been evident in some of the championships that have been held and in the competition. So it's not ever going to be 100% perfect, just like any other judging system. And the human factor enters into it anyway. But the judges are smart enough. They'll keep themselves as clean as they possibly can be. I presume that there are games still going on in some way or another. I don't know how you can, you know, but I suspect there are. But I don't know. I think that in looking at the anonymity, I mean, people have to accept what they've done. They have to be upfront and accept that, yes, I did that. But especially in the world of ice dancing, there was so much pressure on members to get their judges to vote a certain way that the one of the ways that you could do it was if nobody knew what mark they ever gave. And in that respect, I think maybe it worked in ice dancing to some degree, because I think that certainly we were forever faced with the deals that were going on in the background in events, when people were, you know, this member would negotiate with that member, I'll do this for you if you'll do that for me, and so the anonymity, I'm not too sure I'd have to think about how I would have done it, but eventually in the end you have to be upfront with what you've done. Absolutely. Absolutely. There were, well, you may even hear it this afternoon when you go down with Franny, that two of the judges in one of their pair skating events were suspended for life for their judging and whatever their deal was. So it has gone on. It has gone on. And I mean, there have been questions. When I say nobody, I've had somebody come by way of the grapevine, like to say, well, maybe your judge, you could get your judge to do this, but they've never come to me personally. I think that certainly happened in the case in Austria when the second judge, I can't think what his name was, the other guy, he's dead now, but he was from Austria. And, it's a funny thing. I've tried to explain it to other people. This is my own personal feeling. We have all grown up in North America. We've never had any problems with our living or food on our table or clothes on our back or living in poor living conditions with one light bulb or whatever. These other countries, that particularly in Europe, they've come from some terrible backgrounds where they've been deprived of so much. And to be a champion skater, to be a medal winner, it all means money. And the higher you went, you got a car, you got a fur coat, you maybe got a bigger apartment, you got something. It was also a ticket to the outside world. You could get out of the countries, that were perhaps communist driven. So they're two worlds for us. We don't understand the mentality over there because we never experienced it and never will. But they live in an environment where they, people made deals. You got a better house if you knew somebody, or maybe an extra can of paint for your front door, or it was a different world. I don't know what it's like now. I think they've all opened up, but it meant it enhanced their lifestyle in lots of cases. I think if any judge is caught with that, they should be gone. I mean, if you're going to do it once, maybe you'll do it again. I just think if a judge does that to a skater, they should be out of the system. Well, I think that certainly they should both be gone. I think his misdemeanor was greater than hers. You can't be the president of a federation, serve on the council, and do that kind of thing. I mean, that to me was totally inexcusable. Totally. And I feel very strongly about that. I think your position on it, whether you're a council member, and it's very hard to wear two hats. And I think in the future you will find that I don't know what proposals are coming up now, but it certainly was discussed on occasion that no federation president should be a council member. You can't wear two hats. You truly can't. And at the moment, there are several on the council that are also federation presidents. I would have to say, how could I phrase it? I think it's such a detriment to the skater that I just feel that it's so bad to do that to a competitor who's giving everything to do their best and then to be done in by a judge. I'm sorry. I think they have to go. I don't know what I don't know what I would say. I really don't. We always used to say when we were judging, and this had nothing to do with cheating or anything like that. It's the very odd judge that doesn't have a bad day, that doesn't have, in any event, one absolute mark that you don't know where you got it. It just was wrong. But we always said, and if you're giving a lecture to judges, as we used to do, if you make a mistake, circle it, and the other judges will save you. And I would think maybe that's all you could even think about with Mary Wren, if she's on my panel, and if she was on the panel again, that the other judges would be honest, and she's one of 10 or whatever. I mean, I don't know what else you could say. But we always used to do that because we all experienced just god-awful mistakes in a judge, one in an event. But the other judges saved you. They judged it right and majority wins, so you would be okay. not okay, but at least the skater wouldn't feel the impact of your mistake. I think it's a mixed bag. I think that for the bulk of the time I was there, I think they really progressed really well. I think they took on, and I'd have to say this even for the education of the speed and short track people, they they took on the education of their officials, and they improved the running of their events. They upgraded the office. They got into the modern world business wise. I think it is a bit mixed bag. There's been so much emphasis the last couple of years on the judging system since 2002 that, and I retired then, and I really did file away the papers. I keep an eye on it, but I can't say it's wonderful. I haven't worked it, so I don't feel I'm in a position to comment. I think there are mistakes made in parts of it, and maybe there's been too much emphasis on that. I don't know. I'd say it's a mixed bag, but certainly the initial years of my time there, I think, were very valuable, and they moved forward. Well, I guess that there's always been an element around for many years. Even back in the 1980s, there was a move afoot to separate speed and figure skating, so that they would become autonomous over their own sport. So it isn't a new idea, and I guess it surfaces periodically, and it surfaced again, and maybe it was out of frustration. I don't really know. I think that they felt that they were all very expert in the field of figure skating, and maybe they felt that the time was ripe to figure skating had some problems with the judging and whatnot in Salt Lake, and maybe they felt that it was time to that perhaps they could do a tidy up job. I honestly don't know. Perhaps lack of numbers. I don't know whether they had hoped that other people felt as strongly about it as they did. Um, I will say it's unfortunate that in the development of the WSF, the people who became very much involved with it really did know the sport, and they're lost to the sport now. So in that effect, it is a loss. Their knowledge was tremendous. Not that there aren't others, and my husband always used to say, pass the dice and get on with this. Somebody else is going to be as knowledgeable as you are. And yes, there are very knowledgeable people, but they did lose some people who had contributed a great deal to the sport and could continue. I think that was maybe part of the frustration in the sport. It's just you can't compare some of the things. I think that's part of the frustration. Well, I think that they're being very careful in what they're saying. I mean, how can I put this? That I think they're slightly afraid to speak out, and maybe there's a little bit of fear that they might say something that would be detrimental to the ISU, that would be, that they would feel that they would be reprimanded for, and also I think it's just fear of being interviewed, just general fear of being interviewed by the press. Well, he became the co-chair of the Development Commission for the ISU, which gave him a wonderful platform to travel around the world and visit every single country that he could possibly manage, and with programs and money and so on and so forth. And then, you know, he managed to get them thinking as a political platform to get votes. Oh, it really didn't matter one way or the other to me, because my days were coming to an end anyway. I would like to have stayed on and finished a couple of bits of work that I thought I would like to do. But I mean, I was quite ready to retire at 2002. I didn't like the way that David did it personally, to me, because I had known David as a, is this on tape or doesn't matter if it is.
Yeah.
I had known David for, umpteen years as a skater and as a friend and as whatever, and they were family friends of ours, and you know, came to everybody's wedding and christenings and all that kind of thing, and so on and so forth. And when and I was at an event in I think Bratislava or Prague, I can't remember which, whatever was the European prior to the a year before the election. And this chap from Armenia asked me for coffee, and he said, David's going to be running for the council. And I said, oh, that's nice to know. What happens if I'd like to continue to run? Anyway, so then I waited for a year and a half, and David never, ever spoke to me about running, that he was going to run for the council. So that was totally personal. Totally. I mean, we could have made it would have been great, you know, if he'd said, Joyce, I'd really like to go. And I would have said, David, it's all yours. But he chose to. 18 months I gave him to say, I'm going to run. But in the meantime, he was cruising the world with this development commission, which I have to say I supported whole, because he's a very good organizer. And he just made it his platform and got himself elected, and then got to Japan, and the Canadian Association had, I said, well, I was giving him lots of time, and then before the December beforehand, I said, well, I'll make up my mind when I'm going to run. And the Canadian Association said, well, we're supporting you. And then in the end, I don't know, about 6 weeks before the event, called and said they were going to support David. And I said, I guess you lied then, didn't you? And so anyway, but that ended the friendship, essentially. I mean, I've never rude to him, or, you know, I've seen him at meetings, and actually we flew home from Japan together, but, you know, I would never trust him again. Well, I think he was working with them, providing support, financial support by way of the ISU to these other countries, because he needed their vote. And certainly at some point or another, you know, in the money that the Canadian Association had offered to the ISU following one of the events, we offered a great deal of money to the ISU. I have got 2 clues. I really don't know. I think he's been very quiet. You haven't seen David mentioned anywhere in the last 4 years, have you? I really have no idea. None. I was just offended personally that a lifelong friend could do that. I mean, all he had to do was just say, Joyce would really like to run, and I would have said, big deal, but he closed off totally. And we used to, you know, we always used to meet about proposals and what Canada was going to do, and so on, and that was no longer part of the game. I never gave one. The only one I think I'd have to be honest with this, and the only one I think I would ever have given would be for and it was an event I was judging, was Mack and Mabel that Torvill and Dean skated. And that particular year, we did not judge the whole of the event. I judged the compulsory dances and the OD, and I did not judge the free dance. So that to me was the only one that just stuck out in my mind in my judging career. If I'd ever been there, they'd have been 6-0 for both marks. Absolutely. And it's funny because in the years when I was doing seminars and running around the world doing, things like that, I always took a copy of Mack and Mabel, and I'd say to the people who were in the audience, what would you like to see? Oh, have you got Mack and Mabel? Outstanding. I'm not even sure that it wouldn't win today. I mean, I'm not sure in the technical content, probably not, but I don't think anybody ever surpassed it. Their skating skills were superb, absolutely superb, and it was just an exciting. But that was how I really never came to give my 6-0. I sat in the audience, having lived through all the bloody compulsory dances, and actually in their book written about that event, I gave them I tied them, I think, for second in the polka, and which of course was written up. That was an absolute no-no, but they added a step to the dance. They were off time, and as I came away from the judging stand, the coach who had invented the polka with the two Americans was Ron Ludington. And when I came around the side of the rink, he said, "Joyce, when you need your letter, I'll write it for you." But they had gotten themselves off time, and they had to add a step to get back on time again. So, I've had some fun with Torvill and Dean over the year, and we're still good friends. But anyway, I didn't get a chance to judge their Mack and Mabel. I think it was, I think as I said, their skating skills are superb. I think it was so, when I say choreographed and performed to the music, I think that's why everybody loved it. And some years afterwards, we introduced a system into the Skate Canada and called artistic skating. And during some of the lectures that I had to do that, I did a lecture, or part of it, on what an audience feels. And I went through a great deal of trying to show people that our whole life is based on rhythm. Like our heartbeat, our breathing, we walk in rhythm, everything is rhythm. It's something we don't even understand or know. But if you sit in an arena and the music is playing, and they're not doing it to the music, you don't know maybe why why it's not ringing a bell with you. But someone comes out with such a superbly put together program like Mack and Mabel, and like you could feel every bit of it yourself. So it's something you can't explain, I don't think. It just, everybody touched it, everybody felt it. It was just there. And not everybody has that musical skill. And but it all is something we don't understand within us, that our life is based on rhythm. Oh yeah, I was a team leader in Sarajevo. Yes, I saw Bolero. Well, it didn't appeal to me nearly as much as some of their other work. Again, but superb in its execution. And everybody said, oh, it's breaking all the rules. It wasn't breaking any rules. They put in rules after that in order to make them move. I mean, there was nothing in the book that said you couldn't kneel on the ice and do your thing to the, it was just a different kind of a program, exquisitely put together, but not something that really rang a bell with the public, really. The other thing that will be forever remembered, apropos of that year, there was, and again, if you ask a skating entourage and about Mack and Mabel or any of the others, and I'll go on to some single skaters in a minute, but was what we call the walk in their original dance. It was a paso doble. And that music, if you even hear it on the radio today, you could always remember how he dragged her up the ice, and people haven't forgotten that either. But they don't remember anything of Bolero, like anything specific. it was just an overall, but they never forgot that OD. But apropos of single skaters as well, I was at a dinner with the hierarchy again back in Birmingham, and Courtney Jones was there, and Ottavio, and a number, I guess some other council members and so on, and others who were just there. And we went around the table. We had been asked to what were the memorable performances that we had seen in our careers. And there were 2 or 3. I remember one of Robin Cousins. Did you say you were going to interview him? He did a short program, I think it was Worlds in Ottawa, to one of the Gilbert and Sullivan programs. Just spectacular. There was another program done by a very lesser light, and I can't remember his name. I think he might have been German. He skated an old-fashioned skating routine. Again, it was mentioned by these people around the table. So there are certain single skaters with special programs as well. John Curry's old-fashioned skater was outstanding to see him. He did practically nothing. But, you know, it again, I came from an era that you looked at their feet. And I remember one time I was an assistant referee with Lawrence Demi, who's, you know, an ice dancer, par, whatever. And of course, he just thought the Russians were whatever, and the event ended, and Bestyumanova Buchan were first, and Klimova Ponomarenko were second. And he turned to me and he said, "And you've got the results reversed." I said, "Yes, I have." I said, "You didn't look at their feet." And now that particular event, Klimova and Ponomarenko should have won. They never skated as well again. But that particular time, they should have won that European event, you know. But everybody is very sort of caught by the, you know, arms and legs and heads and whatever, never mind what they're doing with their feet. Like an edge would be nice. I honestly don't remember. Toller worked for me because I got very interested in shows and things, and I always produced the ones at the cricket club, and they again were something very different. They were theater in the round, and we built, and the ice surface was very small, and Toller always skated, and one time I took him to do a show at the city hall, and he was and the reigning Canadian champion David McGilvery was about to retire, and Toller was going to show up, was going to move up, not show up, but move up probably to being the men's champion of Canada. And he appeared down in the city hall in the show, I tell you, in an outfit from outer space. So I went to his coach and I said, "You know what? You're going to have the men's champion, but he can't go dressed like that." So I said, "I will take Toller shopping. We will buy the fabrics of his choice, I mean the colors he wishes, and I will take him to a tailor." And I did. And he used that tailor till the tailor moved on to Stratford and Toller went on. So my experiences with Toller have been very sort of different along the way. And I just remember him skating. But he opened the door, in a sense, for men's artistic impression, if you like. Prior to that, they were very straightforward. But I think he was the first one that got the men out and that they could do something more with the artistic part of their program. And so for that much I can tell you about him. But I never judged him, and you know, and I certainly, you know, used him whenever I could, and he always skated for us in the show and so on. Well, I judged them as well. Yeah. All of them. I've known them all well. Each one to me had a certain something of their own, and the Russian dancers, they brought something to the sport that we really didn't have. You know, they were so what should I say, elegant and whatnot. The Duchenes, I knew them as they were kids as well, and they again opened the door to something else, and kind of looking at the free dance it was My Fair Lady, that the Russians did the year that they were here in Halifax or whatever, wherever the Worlds were that year. I think it was Halifax. And the Duchesne skated to that animal, that African theme and so on and so forth. Again, very difficult to compare the two because they were so different. Both totally legitimate, both exciting, so, it's hard to say. But I've seen some wonderful dancing along the way. And also some wonderful single skaters, but as I say, I don't zero in on them. I can tell you that when Ilya Kulik hit the scene, as a very young kid, he showed up out of nowhere at a junior worlds in Hungary somewhere. And again, I was the technical delegate. So again, I was out watching. Whenever his music on, the other chap I was working with, we'd go out to watch him right away. There was something about that boy from the time he got there. And the same thing with Plushenko and who's the one that is down in Connecticut?
Not LeGougne.
LeGougne. They've all also been buddies of mine along the way. And when they also came on the scene at a Junior Worlds in Australia. And you could tell from day one that little guy was going to he was out there this high, but he was going to win that event. And he didn't win it, of course. But you knew that boy was on his way. So it's fun for me. That's the kind of thing that I watched over the years. I would see the ones that you knew had a spark or a something that set them aside from maybe the other kids that were there, Well, I don't know. It's funny. Some years ago at the games in Lillehammer, I was being interviewed by somebody or other, and they said to me, well, "What do you think is going to happen, and what do you think the future is going to be?" And as a total, as you know, basically a nice dancer, I said, "Well, it's going to go somewhere in the technical world, and quads are going to be number one." And let's face it. Like quads are number one. And when I got off that interview, David Dore said, well, I wouldn't have answered that. He said, you should have talked about open competitions. And I just smiled at him because where are open competitions now? Like they're nowhere. And quads are way up high. So I laughed. I said, well, the old lady, the ice dancer, knew a little bit more about the sport than he did. But where it's going to go now, I don't know. I don't think open competitions are part of they will happen, and they'll be whatever they are. Championships, I think that, people always want a championship because they want to see who's the biggest and the best and that sort of thing. So forever you will have that interest. Technically, I'm not sure where the sport will go. I think some of the athletic requirements are a detriment to the development of the skater in the long term, physically. I think that the emphasis on quads and whatnot, and certainly triples and whatnot for some of these young skaters, that's a detriment to them physically. I know I listen to the medical advisors and what they have to say about it, whether that will ever have an impact on the sport and slow it down slightly. My thoughts are it won't, but it certainly does have an impact on some of the skaters. But as to where the sport will go, it'll depend upon the money they get and whether you can revitalize the TV interest, and I'm not sure you're going to do that.